we were told in no uncertain terms that our forest here on this side of the lake was going to be logged. That was basically a fait accompli. So the option there was then for us to have our own forest management, i.e. a community forest, and to log it on our terms. And that's where we are now.
The community forest began as another war in the woods confrontation. Clear-cut logging that residents believed threatened the water supply for 2 villages on the shores of Kootenay Lake.
The history of the community forest kind of evolved over a lot of years. When we were many of us trying to protect this whole land base as a Class A provincial park. And to make a long story short, in the end, we were successful in achieving a park, but our watersheds were excluded from the park for a bunch of reasons. And so at that point, we made the decision to try to take over the land base ourselves and manage it the way we wanted to see it managed.
Where nobody lived was a park. Where 500 to 600 people lived and drew their water off the mountains, they were going to log.
Virtually everyone in these 2 villages gets their water from streams running off the mountains behind the towns. That water was threatened by clear-cut logging.
This is the Harriet Proctor Community Forest in here, and these are the main creeks that everyone drinks out of.
A big part of the park campaign involved blockades of Laska Creek, which is the first valley to the west, past our community forest towards Nelson. And there was 700 people on that blockade. Many got arrested that day to kind of show their support for how important the park was to them.
There were arrests made, and so I think it was about 80 arrests that day, and so that started it brought into the limelight the fact that people just weren't prepared to put up with what was going to happen.
We saw it as imperative that we have control over what happened in our backyards.
And we said, now, we got the community forest, now what? Well, there were people thinking ahead, and you had to have a business to operate. So the Harriet Proctor Community Cooperative was formed.
But this was a different kind of business, with a different kind of forestry, one that looked to the long term.
We're leaving our options open for the future. If we took all the volume now, well, you'd be waiting 100 years before you had another opportunity in here to do something. Now we can, depending on what happens with climate change, what happens with how the vegetation and the trees respond, we can do this or we can do that.
What shaped our vision was a method of planning called ecosystem-based management. And in a nutshell, what that means is you focus on what you need to leave intact to ensure ecosystems function and sustainability before you decide what or anything if you can cut. So, for instance, you look up a hill and say, is this too steep to log? Is there a creek there that we need to protect, and how far do we have to stay away from it? Is this soil too thin to grow trees again on it? All too often in forestry, we can blast roads into anywhere. With our technology these days, it doesn't mean we should.
When you're working in a forest, it's a dynamic ecosystem. It's got a whole bunch of values and a whole bunch of things going on. We are extracting timber, and that is the primary economic factor in what we're doing. But our starting point in the community forest is to protect the watersheds that everyone in Harriet Proctor drinks out of. So where we're standing here, the water coming off this hillside ends up going into a little creek down that way, and it becomes someone's drinking water.
Our main purpose is actually to protect that source of water as well as all the other values in the forest aside from timber. So timber is a means to an end in terms of protecting our watershed, and sustaining our community forest is part of that picture, part of the package.
But with a small annual cut and a forest management plan that's more expensive than industrial forestry, it's necessary to find markets that will pay a premium for their wood. Having it certified by the Forest Stewardship Council is important to users like the traditional timber framing company. The pegs that hold the timber frames together are made from larch, salvaged from the community forest.
For us, it is important that it's not only certified wood, but it's actually local wood, as we're predominantly local business that's supplying a local market. People do appreciate that we're using a resource that comes out of their own backyard.
The way we try to recoup some of our costs is by really being careful about trying to sort out our higher value products and move as many of the higher value products, for example, bigger fir or cedar, and move that into our sawmilling stream where we can gain more value out of the log rather than selling round log. We're managing for, let's say, 7 or 8 different identifiable values, and the only one that pays is timber, and yet the most important values are the values that aren't priced in the marketplace.
It's really difficult to find that point where you can look after your forest, do the expensive kind of forestry that it takes to do that, and make a profit in the end.
The biggest challenge for us, I think, is to make our value-added program pay off, because it's not how many trees that get cut, it's the revenue generated from the whole that is creating the payback. And this is a real strong focus for me, where I would like to see us cut less than our annual cut and increase the margins greatly in our value-added program.
That's right, because what we're trying to do is leave our options open for future generations, and to make sure that there's a land base and a forest here for them to manage and to benefit from, and to drink the water out of the creeks down the road.
And the approach in historic timber framing, where the woodworker was actually the logger as well. So there was always a natural connection between construction and forestry that we lost over the decades, over the centuries. And in Harrow Proctor, we're trying to bring that connection back and actually have a relationship between the woodworker and the forester.
We need to shift how we're analyzing values and start to incorporate other things onto the bottom line. But also, I'm hoping the consumer will recognize that this is important enough that they will be willing to pay a premium because it's the right thing to do.
When a customer is buying our wood, they know where it came from. They know it's locally produced. They also know that it's managed in an ecologically and socially sustainable manner.
Just in general, looking around the province again, there's way too much emphasis on this throughput thing, where we think we got to have this commodity to make money, and wood is too cheap. Like, houses are built, I think the life expectancy of the house in the States is 60 or 70 years. That's crazy.
We're taking pride that we can actually look at 100-year cycles for the houses that we build, because we do believe, due to the materials that we use and the design that we're applying, that they will be around for that long. We're getting buildings that are shaped by nature, and this is not just a slogan, it's the reality, because the underlying notion of this is that we have a long-term vision for our buildings, and we have a long-term vision for our supplier, which is the community forest. And that's where we connect the dots, and the larger picture will emerge that the way we consume heavily affects our environment, and we can control that by creating products that actually respect our environment.
People are becoming more sensitive to where their wood is sourced, how it's logged, how the forests are managed around that wood, and I think that it's finally coming full circle for us, anyways. And so, yeah, we're recertifying again this coming week or month.
Even if we're not big, we're real and we're complete, and we're demonstrating that there's a diversity of ways that you can go about managing forests. And what we'd like to see is what we feel, in fact, in the community forest movement and the sustainable forest movement in Canada. We feel like we're one player of in a growing community of practitioners who are showing what can be done on the ground and doing things a somewhat different way, in a very pragmatic and realistic way, but also in a way that has some quite lofty ideals. You know, the challenge is to connect those lofty ideals to action on the ground, and showing that works over the long term and in a real community.